Welcome everyone, to everyone out there. Love seeing all the faces in the crowd. Welcome to joining all of us. Yeah, I think this is going to be the most static I'll ever be at a social innovation summit. Usually I walk around and try and hang out with people, but this time we're just going to hang out here, all our beautiful faces and all your beautiful faces out there, looking at everybody's background, trying to get an insight into their personalities. But I'm really excited about hanging out with this group. Just in the earlier discussion, the five of us had already realized the 1% separation, 1 degree of separation. We all know people that each other know. So it was a quick introduction to each other. And then also just, I'm going to throw open with that question a little bit later around, we all have more or less similar jobs, but slightly different defined, and how does that impact the views that everybody has? I'm going to let each speaker introduce themselves, but just a little bit from me, about me. Henk, out here in Seattle with HootSuite, both head of corporate marketing and then head of social impact, CSR as well. This is even not a Pacific Northwest accent. You'll be surprised. From South Africa, trade unionist, anti-apartheid activist, ran campaigns at Oxfam, created a campaign for then President Nelson Mandela called Proudly South African, of which I am proudly South African. Landed up on the dark side of business, agency, Salesforce, Edelman, now at HootSuite, and having so much fun. It's incredible being able to be part of a group of people whose simple mission is, how do we make this better for all of us over here? But I'm going to switch over to everyone else. Maybe start off with Erin, give a quick introduction about herself, and then the added question to that is, what gets you excited? We live like 2019 is that year we look back and go, wow, we wish we could have 2019 back. You know, it's never thought we would say that. What a year it's been. But what gets you excited? Because we're at the forefront of so much of what's been going on the last few years or the last few months. So love to hear what gets you excited and a little bit about you.
Great. Thanks, Henk. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Erin Baudo Felter. I'm the VP of Social Impact at Okta. We are, for those that don't know Okta, if your organizations don't use it, we're an identity and access management company serving all industries. Our technology essentially sits at the intersection of the people in an organization and the tools that they need to access. Think about Box or G Suite or Slack. And really, it's just about, giving the right people the right access to the right tools at the right time. And so security plays a big role in what we do, as does general technology enablement. So I joined Okta 3 years ago, just before we went public, to essentially found a social impact program. Our company took the 1% pledge. Our founders and board made that decision. And it was really an incredible chance to build a social impact practice from the ground up. This is the fourth company I've worked in a social impact role in. I started my career about 15 years ago in media and entertainment at Warner Brothers, and then moved on to Yahoo and Zynga in between. But Okta really was the earliest stage company I had ever worked for, the most sort of pure tech company I had ever worked for, and the first B2B company I had ever worked for. And there's some really interesting differences and opportunities that I found sort of doing work in this space. So, like many of us, my role is really social impact generalist. It's leveraging our people, our products, our dollars in service of mission-driven organizations. And I think, I've taken the lens that because we are an early high-growth company, it's really about baking social good into the DNA as quickly and as effectively as possible. And that's really a lot of what my team thinks about is really sort of embeddedness in the organization and how that comes to life. So I'm really excited to talk with this group today about all kinds of things. I would say the one thing that gets me excited right now, which is, as you said, Henk, it's a little tough, but I think something that gets me excited is something we've been working on for a while. And one of the silver linings of COVID is that the work we've been doing on this issue has actually become a little bit easier to talk about and explain. And what we've been looking at Okta for Good is, effectively technology enablement for nonprofits and this issue of the needs around technology infrastructure for nonprofit organizations. It's not sexy. Nobody wants to fund it. Nobody really wants to talk about it. It's pipes and plumbing. It's the connectivity and the devices and the tools and the skills that nonprofits need to sort of do their work. But what we've seen and what we've found is that the sort of rapid shift that every organization is undergoing to remote work, to digital service delivery, to digital fundraising, it really necessitates a rapid digital transformation of the nonprofit sector. We announced a few months ago, really right when COVID hit, although we had been working on it for a while, a $10 million philanthropy commitment over the next 3 years from Okta for Good, and a new nonprofit technology initiative, which is really focused on these issues. And so I think our team feels like it's a time and a moment where we can sort of take what we know as Okta and take the resources that we've been so lucky to sort of see grow through our Pledge 1% commitment over the last 3 years and really put those to work on a critical and sometimes invisible issue around nonprofit technology.
I love that. It's similar to what gets me excited at HootSuite. We're lucky that we're in the social media management space. As we know, we're all here because we can't be in person. One of the few ways that people could stay connected was through social. And we've seen the power of social to filter through what's the information we really need. Wash your hands, stay away from each other 6 feet apart, and what's good information, what's bad information, and that kind of network. And just being able to use that. And the challenge for us as a company is how do we connect even more people to build relationships in this disconnected world? We can use these tools more to build those relationships. And that's really, really exciting. I think that's the benefit of us all being in tech, is that at the heart, we don't need to be in a room to actually connect with each other, thanks to the tech. But Bryan, I'm going to shoot it over to you. A little bit about yourself and what gets you excited. And we can talk Salesforce later.
Well, for me, the way that I get excited is just to wake up every morning, because I'm completely excitable and hyper all the time. I'm glad that 300 heart brains have joined us here. It's always hard to get 300 people in those tiny rooms that Zeev rents for this conference. So this is really exciting. Even though we've tried, I think we've tried to get 300 in one of those small rooms before in the Bay Area and in Washington, D.C. But that said, I'm excited right now about the promise that resources and privilege and power that corporations have can in fact be mobilized to generate social, environmental, and economic value together. And I'm really excited about the way that my new employer, Zillow Group, has responded to my being a new executive there for a month. And in my 80 or 90 deep 30 or 45 minute kind of one-to-one conversations that I've had at the company, everyone from the co-founders to a person responsible as an associate for facilities and occupier studies is excited about how what the company has spent many, many years building can be applied to social and environmental impact. And so it's interesting that I'm excited and I'm crying literally 5 times a day, every day right now, because of the state of affairs in our world. So I'm excited that I've joined an organization professionally that is ready to mobilize and take a stand and use its superpowers in a productive and systemic way to address a lot of injustice that frankly has me tender even as I say that word, because it's so present. And so many family members have lost their companies or their careers temporarily during everything. So I'll pass the baton over to Vikrum, if you don't mind, so I can go ahead and let these tears come out. But I'll tell you, it's encouraging to see so much power and privilege actually be humble and be ready to mobilize our technology, our voice, our platform, our cash, our people's energies and networks toward social and environmental ends. And lucky for me, equality and justice is on their short list here at Zillow. Over to you, Vikram.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, sir. From where I sit, I am the Vice President at Postmates, overseeing public policy and strategic communications. And when we think of social good, I think we also think about what are some systemic regulatory challenges, legislative challenges, just public policy issues that have also contributed there, which kind of informs how our general practice at the company. Three main things that kind of excite us. The pandemic response really exposed a lot of tensions economically. That's an obvious statement. But against the backdrop of about 40 million jobless claims in this country, Postmates has seen about an 84% increase in workers seeking to work on this platform. And so I think that means we have a tremendous opportunity to really figure out what low barrier of entry work looks like at this moment in time, and then also to hold ourselves accountable at lifting up standards for worker protections. I can call a spade a spade. The gig economy, like companies like ours or Uber or others, have long been critiqued for its practices, and rightfully so. I think what's happening right now is it's forcing our company to rethink how we protect workers during a pandemic, including unveiling brand new worker benefits for workers that previously didn't have them, including sick leave, family care and child care, long-term mental health resources and training. That's really exciting to me, just because we can kind of innovate for what a safety net should look like at a moment where a safety net feels like it doesn't exist. The second thing is just this notion of social good having a renaissance. I know there's no end to all of the Edelman reports, the McKinsey reports that speak to the importance of purpose and impact inside companies. But I think when I think of social good or tech for good, I also just think of someone taking a photo on their camera of someone cleaning up on the streets after last night's protests, of just trying to help revitalize and rebuild a community together. And I think just sort of spotting this notion that we all feel dire straits right now, but we all want to roll up our sleeves and figure out how the hell we can help. I think that means a lot. And then the third and final thing is just the fact that in the midst of everything, you've got 300 eyeballs, or probably 600 eyeballs, on this screen, taking a look at what else we can do, what we can do better. It sounds hokey, but that's pretty damn cool, because that means that there's interest to try and figure out what else we can do, despite all of us being professionals that occupy this space.
Love it, Bryan and Vikram. Ali, over to you.
Sure. So this is a fun opportunity. I'm laughing, Bryan, when you gave the analogy of like 300 people crowded into a small room, because that brings back good memories. But this has been fun. So I lead a practice at JPMorgan called Technology for Social Good, or Tech for Social Good. Fits well into the title of this. And I started it at JPMorgan about almost 10 years ago now, coming over from a nonprofit that did tech assistance for other nonprofits named Empower. So I think I connect with many. That was our kind of like one degree of separation with my colleagues here on this panel. But what's been a lot of fun is, and I think, when you first make the move from a nonprofit over to a for-profit, your colleagues who you've had friends for 10 plus years, like, you're going to the dark side. But what's been so amazing has been how this has been embraced, and really recognizing the power of social good, both to obviously give back the obvious within the community, but also to empower the people within a company and to get them thinking differently about working in a company like JPMorgan, in ways that we can leverage, the resources that we have, the amazing talent and minds that we have, in ways to give back. We use it in ways to develop our staff, to give them experiential learning opportunities. We use it in ways to give our staff opportunities to kind of get, to actually give back to within the staff, building out solutions for nonprofits, as well as recruiting staff in through hackathons and giving youth opportunities and exposing them to what careers could be like. What's been fun and what excites me is this whole opportunity about doing things differently. COVID has been, as horrible as it's been, I think for my team, it hasn't been difficult in the sense of like how we need to transition. What I've loved is how quickly we could become global. And actually what excites me is actually seeing my whole team actually more frequently in every conversation, and feeling much more connected. So when we virtualized, we went global as well, much more quickly. So while I have a global team, it just felt like we were that much more connected. But where something historically might have taken, which in our terminology might take a long time, might have taken months or a year plus to get people convinced that this is a good way to do things and to do things differently. Now things are happening in weeks, if not days, because we have this excuse of like, you just got to do it now. And people are doing it and trusting us, and we're making some amazing things happen in a very short period of time. So that's definitely something that excites me, and it just feels good. I think we're all going to sleep exhausted. None of us are sleeping. I was mentioning before that we're Googling insomnia apparently more frequently than anything else these days. And it's been hard, but at least it feels good to wake up and know that I'm going to do more good in the morning.
That's so true. It's one of the things that I look, and I've always asked the question, are you a global company? Not you specifically, but when I look at businesses, I ask, are you a global company, or are you an American / German / Canadian / UK company that just happens to operate globally? And because of COVID and everything else, we've been forced to not think from just our locality, but to really start listening and operate more, because it doesn't matter where you sit. If you're sitting anywhere, any of us facing a screen in these days are from the privileged class. That's just one of those realities. And let's embrace that and say, like, we can feel guilty, or we can say, what do we do with our privilege to make sure that other people can benefit from this power that we have? That I see as my voice of Mandela in the back of my head the whole day. It's like, what are you doing with this? Don't feel guilty about it, but what are you doing about it? And that's action. So I have to call out Vuyani. I see another South African asked a question. We'll get to the questions later, but can't help but give a shout out to another South African. We were talking about like how quickly things change, and especially in tech, not just the last couple of months, but just in general, things change like that. I look at TikTok, nobody would have thought of TikTok 2 years ago. It just wasn't one of those things. Now it's entertainment. The last thing my daughter sent me was a TikTok video about Hulu, so that's entertainment nowadays. But in this kind of tech industry moving so fast, what have you done with that kind of fast moving, and how's that impacted how you've just operated in the last few months, and how you approach social impact, sustainability, whatever you call it within your specific home? I'll throw it out. Let's start with Vikrum.
Yeah, I know I came from government prior to this, and the refrain, at least when I joined Postmates in 2017, is this perception being like a stodgy political bureaucrat of just like tech always moves fast, right? And is agile and nimble. I think right now that ethos or that spirit is really being pushed to the test. Certainly for a company like ours, I don't think any of us, myself at least included, who tends to use Postmates if I'm hungover on a Sunday and trying to get a burger delivered to my house, necessarily assumed that a burger delivery app or a burrito delivery app would play a role in a pandemic response. But in the days that actually led up to at least the Bay Area County, where I'm based right now, put its first shelter in place in order, we spent a number of days talking to chiefs of staff from mayor's offices and governor's offices, trying to figure out whether we can be deemed an essential service. Then when the Trump Department of Homeland Security actually deemed food delivery and meal delivery an essential service, what it meant was all of a sudden, the policy teams or the social good teams that tend to be outwardly facing with community actors and nonprofits and lawmakers started turning into a business development funnel and pipeline. It meant that we got inbound from New York public schools looking to help us or help them deliver meals using our logistics platform to students who rely on school meals. Or it meant that FEMA started having questions with the state of California about how to make sure homebound seniors were served. So the use case and the customer segments varied over time. That since allowed us to evolve towards serving nurses, serving homeless shelters, serving students, serving seniors, in addition to the fact that those within privilege, those that do have means, also were looking to these products to get meals and goods delivered. So I think it forced us to be agile. And the second thing is kind of interesting, and Ali, this is building on your point a bit, that it sort of shifted the sense of priority, I would argue, or license, maybe that's a better word, license for the social good and policy and CSR teams inside the companies, meaning that I know a lot of us, ourselves included, have struggled with, can you get executive buy-in for your programs? Even if all of us, are engaged and supported by our executives, sometimes moving, hey, let's drop everything with this big Postmates deal with a major brand and let's go and serve FEMA doesn't sound like the sexiest idea inside the building. So it takes some pushing and nudging that you have to push across the finish line. But I do think that because the agility required for a product to pivot at this moment in time also requires listening out how we can put people over products, it means that any of us that has this role inside a company has a really unique opportunity and has to guard it responsibly, because it means that you can set the course for where your company goes in this moment. But you also have to be active and not be afraid of some prior pushbacks that you've gotten, because it's time to try again, especially now.
Love it. Erin, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's right that, there's maybe never been a period of a few months where CSR leaders have had such a seat at the table in being able to hopefully help inform decisions, but really like push the work that we've all been probably building for years inside of our organizations, and be able to shine a light on it and put some gasoline there and just say, let's go. And I've definitely, I think, noticed that certainly at Okta and even with our peers. I mean, one of the, there's a couple of thoughts I have just in terms of moving fast and agility and what I've seen work well recently. I mean, on the Okta side, what's been interesting is that, we are a technology that enables remote work. That's our business. And suddenly everyone and every organization in the world has to pivot to remote work. It's a huge opportunity for us to both sort of like see the value of the products we have already deployed with customers and enable them to make this pivot, but then to think about what else can we do to like really help push this shift. And so one of the things we did as a company was essentially offer a package of our products for free for any organization that needs it. It's called Okta for Emergency Remote Work. And a lot of our peer companies, if you look at organizations like Box, organizations like Slack, like there's a sort of rapid emergency remote work offering that many organizations have, not just for nonprofits, although that's a big piece of it, I think, from our point of view, but for any organization. And so to be able to sort of pivot and be a company that can make this new world work has been a really big priority for us, and I think has served as a way to sort of bring the company together on some common values. The other thing that I think is relevant, especially for those listening in this group, is the amount of rapid collaboration that has happened across not just tech companies, but sort of all companies as it relates to some of the issues we're facing is a really big deal. And I think is a huge part of how we build out of this into a better future and a better way forward. I know for us, sitting in Silicon Valley and being a part of sort of the new sort of tech cohort, there were, I think, 24 companies that collectively deployed over $20 million in COVID response in just the first 3 weeks of the crisis sort of unfolding, maybe even less than that. But it was like daily phone calls with our peers, trying to understand, what are you doing? How could we work together? Who should we be funding? And looking at it from a global level, a national level, a local level, and really coming together to make some rapid decisions. And I think you sort of see the span between big established players like Salesforce, who have 100 people to think about how to respond really thoughtfully, down to like brand new companies who just took a 1% pledge and maybe have a volunteer running their programs who could still plug in and sort of be a part of this collective effort from the tech sector. And I think that is critical right now, that kind of collaboration. And we all need to push for more of it, open up our playbooks, and let each other in and do more work together.
And that's so true. We're both lucky that our organizations are just right there at the hand if you need to work remote and if things are remote. When this happened, actually 2 weeks before the first lockdowns, our founder and CEO, Bryan Holmes, ran a Twitter survey about what's the most effective ways and tips that people have about remote work. 2 weeks later, that from what he crowdsourced from his 2 million followers was just immediately something that he could share and that we could share across the channels. But what drove us from the beginning was two questions or two approaches, like speed over perfection and what's the right thing to do. Not what's the right thing to do for us as a business, but what's the right thing to do for all of us. And that was just key to how we drove it, and the same as what you did. The first thing we did was, who was going to be hit hardest? Nonprofits, small businesses. How do we get our products in the hands of those people for free to use it? So yeah, it is. We're lucky. Again, how do we use that privilege that we have? But Ali, I'm going to switch over to you, because you're at the heart of two things that drive so much in this moment, both tech and then from a JPMorgan at finance side. And how does these two worlds collide at that speed, and especially over the last few months?
They don't necessarily collide. I was smiling because you said speed over perfection. I'm like, I feel like you were reading my mind. It's exactly one of the things that we've been thinking about. So we actually, the organizations that we engage with aren't necessarily the organizations that we're financing. So they're not necessarily colliding in that way. Where we've been colliding or collaborating, the rapid collaboration term that Erin used more frequently, is that it's no longer just about tech. And I think that's been something, and I was saying this earlier, that when I first joined the firm, they're always asking, like, what are you gonna do next with your career? Like, I just started, give me a second. Like, no, where are you gonna take this next? And you're like, well, I'm gonna make this better. I'm gonna make it bigger. And I did that. And then over the years, like, it's been there 10 years, but it's evolved. It's become something more. But as I've been pushed, they're like, what are you gonna do next? I'm like, well, you know what? There's no reason why this should be just tech. We should be doing it for our folks who work in the finance areas. We should be doing it for people who work in operations, who work in HR, who work in marketing, in all different areas. This makes sense. And now that's exactly what's happening. So in the spirit of rapid collaboration, kind of to take a little bit back to what you were saying, the question before, we collided because they said, we need to throw what we call like a war room together. We had team members being thrown in saying, we have thousands of interns coming in this summer. How are we going to handle them? Like, it was like every day, like, do you think they can come? Do you think they might come? It's like, okay, finally, we're like, they're not coming. But do we cancel these internships? We've made commitments to these individuals. And what was so amazing and what quickly trickled to the top is one of the best solutions is like, we could give them a social good experience. Where we would have done that very easily for just the tech staff, we said we could do it for everybody. And we can make this meaningful and not just window dressing, saying, hey, come in, do something for social good, but do it with real problems, real clients. And one of the things that we're always committed to on our side at JPMorgan is that when we do these projects, we finish them. So in 5 weeks that they're going to come in for their internships, they're not going to build out full-blown solutions, but they'll ideate and they'll come out with some amazing ideas that we will then commit to building out with our staff once they leave, and stay connected with these individuals to say, look at how your project is progressing and look at the impact you're making in social good. And now these will be individuals who are able to use their operations skills, their process improvement skills, their tech skills, their marketing skills, all in the benefit of social good. And we were able to take a model that worked in just the tech space and flip it and apply it to a much broader audience. And that's been a lot of fun to kind of see, saying we've been saying we wanted to do this and it would take some time to build it out, but then because of rapid collaboration and really just a willingness and a hungriness to say, like, let's do something great for these young people who are really being impacted by this, we were able to build out some amazing things for the summer.
Love it. Bryan, you've been in the tech space and at the heart of this kind of social and impact and tech space for so long. What's your views on that kind of speed and especially over the last few months? And then you just started at Zillow. So it's even tougher for you to get a sense of like, oh, how do I move fast? What should I do? Love your view on this.
Yeah, I have no idea what I'm about to say, but I'll say a few things. The role of corporate social impact professionals now is to find ways again to marry the value proposition for a community or environmental stakeholder, and then the employee and their transformation, and then the brand and the solvency and the achievement from a shareholder perspective that's necessary. But I think my programs at Salesforce and LinkedIn and Box and now Zillow, I can't believe I'm so old. I just said a lot of companies right there. But anyway, those roles have all had an authentic desire to create success for the community and the customer in the community, and kind of bring that customer sort of success mentality to the community, and then make certain that they were the hero, but then the supporting actor was the employee, and that the business was then gaining some value so that it could make sustainable the flow of value to those first two groups. And there's 400 of us on this call, and all of us have built some form of justification or observed a justification that people in corporate social impact types of roles have. So I don't have to illustrate a playbook on why this stuff is valuable anymore, thankfully, as my colleagues have projected. But I still don't think that we're at the level of thinking that we need to be, meaning this is a new form of capitalism. This is a global issue that not just our companies and our executives kind of understanding that, hey, there's a business and social value proposition here. It's even literally understanding the mechanics of the capitalist structure and the way that it's regulated and the way it's incented and the way that it is operated in practice. And so I think what's really interesting, and because I've changed jobs, I get to be all philosophical here recently about this stuff, is that if you do in fact zoom out, what we're proving as a network or as a tribe is people that again are trying to harness this corporate power and roll that back into a stakeholder or a beneficiary that should be seen as much as possible as our equal in the equation, are demonstrating what capitalism can be, as much as anything. And that's a stakeholder play instead of a shareholder play. And thanks to Larry Fink and others, a lot of us are starting to sort of march to that drum that didn't graduate from the social welfare part of the campus necessarily in their undergrad degree, but still care a lot about it. It's why green MBA programs are one of the hottest tickets in MBA schools and things like that. People want to apply their superpowers and the things that they attach to back to cause, right? And not just to self-benefit. And so as business models become less extractive and more collaborative, to point to Erin's point, I've been on a lot of those radical collaborative strategy calls where action is happening like years faster than it used to. We just need to know that what we're doing can in fact be case studies or pilots for a bigger, better, brighter, newer phase of capitalism. And it's a capitalism that can respond, frankly, to the tragedies of injustice that we see, the development of the vaccines needed to heal society, and frankly, to get ahead of what we all know is going to just be this tsunami of social challenges, be it mass evictions of underrepresented communities, or all the things that are going to happen when you have 40 million people out of work. So these models and this way of operating, I said this before, I'm new to Zillow, right? I'm 100 relationships in a month, just because there's been like 4 of a scheduling time for me so I can meet everyone so quickly because of the urgency of the time. And now I find myself multitasking and seeing the things come into the corner of my screen that are just like, wow, you as the corporate social impact person now do actually need to serve as a chief social impact strategist for us, because Amy, the CMO, wants to take action effectively, and the business wants to take sustainable action effectively. And the economists at the company want to take action now, and the developers and the product teams. So here I am, a new person in a business to consumer context for the first time, meeting geniuses that want to make a difference. And it's literally on me and a bunch of collaborative documents with hundreds of people invited into them to map out Zillow for good. Not because, again, we want Zillow for good to be better, but because we want our business to be a better citizen in a more of a capitalism 2.0 kind of way. And so it's an interesting sort of responsibility to take on in the midst of what's occurring in the world. But I just wanted to put some of those thoughts out there to elevate even further that this is no longer, to Ali's point, just like more of what we're doing, but we need to step into new domains and elevate those as the possible, and literally have, call it regulators and investors and incentive creators be mindful of for benefit and not just self-gain and extraction. Before I preach way too much, I'll turn it back to you.
No, I love that. One of my philosophies is that every business has a purpose. Question is whether your purpose is relevant to society. But you have a purpose. You either, as a business, you either contribute to society positively or you're selling snake oil. That's a choice you make.
That's right.
But if you think your success of your business is purely on the return on your investment, then that you don't understand why you're in business in the first place. Because that's not the secret of your success. The secret of your success is more relationships to benefit you and those relationships. And that's at the heart of business. So for me, it's almost like we're going back to the heart of capitalism. It's like, why did business start? To service a societal need. If you're not servicing a societal need, don't complain if people say you're not relevant and you're not needed.
And it was only at that turn of the century that the Puritans said, wait, we've abandoned that premise and we're capitalizing for self-gain so extremely that we feel guilty and we need to funnel some of this good back. And likely that meant through the wife to the church. I mean, let's just speak to it. It's 1905 or whenever those years were happening. So philanthropy is born out of a guilt play. And sadly, there are still remnants there, and we need to make certain that this stuff is relevant to solving those societal challenges to create long-term value. And this becomes a religious war very quickly, I know, but I'm saying in general that the role of business is definitely more enlightened now than it's ever been. And it's us that has to capitalize on that and make that real.
You're absolutely right. Vikram, you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, sorry for the...
No, do.
I think it's really interesting what you said, Bryan, because Ali, I believe it was your chief executive and the business roundtable that issued Jamie Dimon and several other executives a call, I think last fall or so, sometime late last year, about what business and capitalism should look like, as Bryan pointed out, and making sure that it's not just focused on the bottom line at all alone. What's really interesting, and maybe this is at the risk of stating the obvious, is now that we're at this stage in the world, I think businesses will be forced, either because of the goodwill that they want to see done in their communities, or because a lot of state governments, let's be honest, are going to look to the business sector to be able to either tax and recover a lot of deficit, like money that has been lost over the last several months. And so I think it's going to force us to operate in an even different way, because it's one thing to say we should look out for our communities where we acknowledge the ills in the world, but that was pre-COVID. I think that there's another thing to say, okay, now what is your ability and your responsibility to step up that work amidst or during post-COVID, because against the backdrop of lost jobs, a lot of this is going to be about economic opportunity, certainly revitalization, but also just, looking at the very stark reality that some of us on this call have those jobs right now. We've had those employers, and several of those out there don't. And I think that intersection where it sits, it's really impossible for any of us to answer alone right now. But I think that's going to be the rub. If the prior years when we talked about economic opportunities were about upskilling and apprenticeship programs and job training, now we're going to figure out, okay, let's sustain that. We need to have career development, and we need to have adult learning and continuous education. But where we actually place them is going to be an even harder discussion to have as we think about opportunity. I think from a Zillow perspective, like certainly housing is rife with all sorts of challenges and interesting opportunities at the same time. But when we think about people just being out of work, even getting people into housing is going to be an important piece. For the Postmates side, so many of the merchants that are on our platform, a lot of them are restaurants, but a lot of them are new. Some of them are bookstores, some of them are farmers market vendors, particularly during COVID. If they had storefronts during the last few days destroyed or damaged, the question isn't just like, hey, we have an app for you that you can help sell and get back on your feet. Is do we or can we have a responsibility to think about targeted community revitalization as sort of an extension of what capitalism is? Because without that symbiotic relationship and without them online or employed, we don't really have a product either. And it's going to be really hard for us to push, but I think that's going to be, there's capitalism 2.0, and I kind of think there's capitalism anchored in a post-COVID reality. Hopefully it's not that grim. Hopefully we turn around quickly and collectively, but I think that is going to be something that our CEOs will look to teams like ours and everyone on this call for, and also look to one another to trade notes around.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to ask one more question before I go and look. And if you see me look to the side, I have the Q&A coming up there. So I want to be sensitive about the questions people ask, but I want to ask one more question because it relates to this. People always look at me like, you're marketing, but you're social impact. How did that happen? It's like, well, I actually started at social impact. She started as a human rights person, anti-apartheid activist, and somehow landed in marketing because, and at HootSuite, I'm lucky, where the purpose of us as a company is at the heart of social impact. It's how do we connect people? So if you don't join those things together, you're having inefficiencies. So bringing marketing and social impact together, it's like, yeah, now we can actually deliver against that brand promise. And as the custodians of the brand promise, that's what we as a team do in bringing that to life. So I'm going to throw it out to you. We said earlier, before we opened to everyone, we could never agree on a name. It's like, we call it sustainability, CSR, social impact, value this, and you name it. But each time we argue about it every 2 years, about what's the right thing to call it. But in the end of the day, it's actually how we implement it internally. I would love to hear from you, both how you implement internally, but some of the lessons that you've had. Ali, you've been there 10 years, so there's a lot of lessons in how you've grown this, and sharp elbows here, and then you feel a sharp elbow. Would love to hear from each of you, like the kind of lessons that you've learned, especially knowing the people listening in, of how you've grown this, and where do you think it's going?
I think for us, it's been fun. Like when we first started, it wasn't a name because I was building something out and we didn't have a name for it. It was like when I would get on the phone with people and I was doing a little bit of what I think Bryan's probably doing now within a new role. I was trying to explain what I was going to be doing. And people would say, I'm going to be doing technology. You know, we're going to be trying to get the teams together and the staff together doing things for social good. And we were trying to think of some cool, fun name, like what would we call this thing? And then finally, one of the junior people on the floor kind of turned to me and she's like, why don't you just call it Tech for Social Good? Because every time I hear you on the phone, you're saying, you know, it's like we're going to be doing Tech for Social Good. So it was very clear, like we were overthinking it. And I think what was important was to give it a name that people were comfortable with. Somewhat in parallel to that is a little bit what Vikrum was just saying about different channels of talent coming in through apprenticeships and through, it's actually the other side of my job, which I didn't speak to, which we call emerging talent programs. But the vocabulary that we use, and especially in a big traditional company like JPMorgan, I have learned somewhat the hard way, is so unbelievably important. So we have been for years through Tech for Social Good bringing talent in through alternative ways, you know, through what you might consider non-traditional. Traditional is like you find people on a campus at a university, you bring them in. You find people at peer companies doing similar skills, you bring them in. But when I introduced this concept and I said, hey, we're going to bring in non-traditional talent, and people are like, wait, what? Non-traditional? You know, we're JPMorgan, you know, and it made people very uncomfortable. Similarly, we would say, you know, okay, we're going to say the alternative talent. And that got people very nervous, you know? So it's just like, you know, it's emerging talent. It's all the same thing, but it was a choice of language. But actually getting people excited about a phrasing and actually having people talk about it, where the backs, we used to say, you know, we don't want to, they say toot your own horn, but don't blow it. We want it to be very balanced. But we also wanted people to know that we're doing amazing things and we want that story to be told. So it's been a big learning curve along the way. But I think we're getting ourselves to a better place.
Excellent.
And
Anyone
then
else?
On the naming front, this is definitely a conversation I've had. I've been a part of 2 for Goods, 1.org, and one team called Corporate Responsibility like 12 years ago. So I've seen a bunch of different names for these things. And I think it's really, I think it's important to sort of follow the trends in the space and understand how your peers and how leaders are speaking about it. And I also think it's very important to sort of like understand the context of your company and who you're trying to reach and who you're trying to speak to with your initiatives. You know, for a company like Okta, that's you know, 3 years ago, not everyone had heard of Okta. It's a pretty pure tech company, again, in the B2B space. And so like adding a for good on the end of it, which was a name that was there before I took the job even, warms it up and makes it really clear to our employees and to our customers what you're dealing with when you're talking to me or talking to my team or working on an initiative with us. And that was great. And it's a shortcut and sort of an easy translation that I think, to Allie's point, like doesn't overthink it and doesn't overcomplicate it. And when I talk to peers and friends and people who know too much, you know, we'll call it something else. We'll call it social impact or social innovation or whatever. But I think it's important to remember, like, a lot of what we do and what we're there to do is to sort of be that coming to life of values for the company, whether that's for employees or for customers or for community members. And it doesn't have to be all that complicated. And so anyway, that's what I think about the naming piece. And then in terms of like how you build or advice on that, especially at the beginning of efforts or in tough times like we're in right now, I think that, you know, well-placed commitments that are public or semi-public are really important, not as the end, but sort of as the means to the end, sort of like marketing, Henk. It's like well-placed marketing is not the end. The goal shouldn't be to tell a great story about social impact. The goal, though, should involve storytelling. And sometimes you need that marketing or you need that commitment or that public visible statement to galvanize everybody to do the work, to focus on actually delivering the impact. And that, I think, is the role of folks like us, is to facilitate those commitments, bring Bryan's CMO to the table who wants to do good, bring other executives to the table, make them own it, right? Get those commitments at the highest level possible, and then go and do the work with all the people on both sides in the community and in our organizations who can sort of bring it to life. And that's, I think, how we've approached it. Go ahead.
I agree 100%. And I think it's understanding the urgency of understanding for the audience for this breakout. If your organization is a bit newer to this, what are what's the legacy of things that you have done that are beneficial to communities, and inventorying that pretty early on, because believe it or not, there's quite a bit in most of our companies, whether it's been overt and led by a senior person in the company or not. So inventory those, and then understand a little bit the sentiment of folks on as you go forward, the immediate, the near term, the long term, certainly weaving in some commits, maybe even earlier than you feel comfortable doing that is important. I would say that for our marketing team to be really proactive about the statements, racism has no home here, sort of early in that flurry of voice raising over the weekend. For me, it was less about, oh, well, we should inventory all the good things we've done. For me, it was literally like pick up the phone with NAACP, ACLU, and 5 or 6 other orgs and really find out, okay, so now's the time that we humbly need to inventory a few things we've done, but let's really, really start figuring out, where does justice enter this model going forward? So to provoke action with those commits, Erin, I know that sometimes saying that you're out there ready to do it, if nothing else, it's a call to action to everybody to make good on it per se, and then inventory what maybe could be applied, and then come in with all the incremental investments and incremental policies and plans that need to align. I mean, I had friends suggesting to me, it's like, hey, are you guys providing protesting days off, protesting volunteer time off? And I was like, wow, maybe this is teeing you up, Henk, for another topic that you might want to cover. But it was like, wow, I don't even have 100% policy buy-in yet on volunteer time off. I'm just arriving. But so maybe that's interesting. Maybe a day for peaceful, productive protesting and taking civic action is actually the impetus to put in place a multi-day volunteer time off policy for the company. So finding diamonds in jagged rough is likely possible also. Touched on 3 things at once. Sorry, Henk. Hard for a facilitator to follow.
No, this is, I love it. I think that makes me think like that's a whole new topic, and the one I would love to get into is, like, especially in this world where we will increasingly work remote. We've always organized it around things that we can organize. There's Pride Week, and we as an organization can back that. There's a plan. We can plan it weeks and months ahead of how we're going to be involved, get our teams ready. But how do you build that agility? And we in tech are so good at agility. How do we build the agility into volunteering and getting our people to participate in the things that they're passionate about in the moment? And where's the lines? And for me, it's like, this idea there's work-life balance has always been this odd thing. I was like, no, there's just life. There's no work and life. There's life. And part of life is you go to work. And part of work is that you take life with you. And now we experience it even more. So I would love to, maybe we should have a separate section just on that. I think that, it's volunteering is going to be stretched very differently, and it will become very different from what we're experiencing it today. So it'll be fun. I want to ask one question coming from the Q&A at least, and then I'll just make it possible for people to ask questions to us afterwards because we're not going to get all 16 questions. But one of the questions from Pina is that any examples of how you reach the vulnerable in this kind of expansion of the digital divide? How do you approach it? And there's no silver bullet. One of the for us at HootSuite, it's partly public-private partnership, but one of the programs that we've been involved in, I've only been there 6 months, and when I heard it the first time, I was kind of like, this is part of our purpose, is not those half of the world's connected. I'm not worried about the world, half of the world that's connected, because it tells me half of the world's not connected. That's my concern. If I'm true to my purpose, how do we as a company get to that? And how do we identify those the most vulnerable? So one of the programs we run with a partner, actually, we run it through a partner, we support it, is providing social skills to refugees. And it's not just saying like, oh, how to use social. No. How do you bring economic benefit to refugees in a camp by using social? Because the one thing about social, and we've learned this thanks to COVID, you don't need to be in an office to do it. You can be anywhere and post on Instagram, be a contractor with someone. So working with those partners, that for me is like, we're starting to get there, but how do you scale that? That's the biggest challenge. But I'd love to hear from you. How do you think about how do we reach those that are not part of our communities? That's not part of us privileged few.
I think on our side, as soon as this happened, we have, at any given point, we have 100 to 150 projects in flight working with social good organizations all over the world. And one of the things that we've always asked those organizations, like, what is the meaning of this project? Like, don't just give us a fluff project, give us something you really need. Not that it's going to shut down if we had to back away, which we never have, but give us something that's going to be impactful for you. That being said, the first question we said, like, even though we're doing impactful projects, is this the one they need right now? we knew that potentially our clients were going to be suffering and or their constituency might be suffering because of the impact of COVID in this pandemic. So we immediately reached out, and it was interesting. We went back and forth with our team, making sure that we had the most thoughtful and sensitive letter going out, saying almost like, sorry to bother you, but just want to let you know we're here and we're ready to pivot as fast as you want us to pivot to do what you really need right now. We are not usually, we don't direct to service to the constituent. We service the organization that has the expertise to service the constituent. So we turned and we said, let's pivot. And we had organizations come back to us and we even said, I need to take a pause. And we said, well, then we'll be here for you when you're ready to come back. And then others just said, well, I do actually want to pivot. I need to do this other thing. Or there's other ones like, my gosh, if I could just finish this other thing that you started, that would be great. It's so good to know you're not backing off. And not only did we not back off of any project, we actually did more. We had more people raising their hands, and it felt like more people wanted to volunteer and give back. It was so important to them. I think Erin said this early on. Suddenly you were that much more relevant, where we were always like, this nice thing happening on the side. It was just like, my gosh, we do this? Great, can we do more of it? And that was where we were really trying to make sure that we were reaching those who were vulnerable, but recognizing we were best doing it through the intermediary of our clients who had that expertise.
Anyone else on that?
I'll take a stab at that. I mean, I think because we have a product that, connects buyers to local businesses and restaurants, and to couriers as a three-sided marketplace. So it's an inherently digital app, but rooted in the real world or the analog world. And I think part of what we're noticing is that, particularly in the last few days, as the world drastically didn't change, but came to a head after maybe 400 some odd years of challenges that have been mounting and bubbling for quite some time, we started thinking internally, what do we want a space and an outlet to be for our employees? Henk, to your point, that's where workers currently are on our phase. They're part of our company. They've got the screens. They're able to communicate with us. But then we start to think about, what do we want to think about in terms of a dialogue with those actual workers that are outside of our four corners of a building, the individual couriers themselves, the businesses themselves. For Postmates, we've started something called the Fleet Advisory Board, which sounds like corporate jargon, but basically it's just like a fancy way of saying that as we think about the future of work and we think about a new safety net for this type of low barrier of entry to work on the gig economy side, we also want to make sure that policies that we're pushing, product changes that we're making, and benefits that we're offering are consistent with the voice of the worker. I think that type of engagement and attitude is exactly what we want to bring to this modern moment. Understanding what is it like to be a frontline essential worker during a pandemic right now, and gaining that feedback loop constantly and regularly, so that way we can iterate on new programs. What it's like to be a merchant that is impacted by both the pandemic, recession, and sort of national strife, getting that feedback and gathering that in. I think that is one way of saying that we all are citizens, as Bryan pointed out, and neighbors, and we have these adjacent communities that we sometimes think about, but we don't necessarily prioritize as our core customer, because either we don't have a fiduciary long-term contractual relationship, or in a moment of an immense crisis, a lot of people in our roles are asked to be the voice inside your building as to what the employees want to hear. But I do think it's important for us to take stock of who are those adjacent community members. And even if they feel 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from you, see if you can cull that feedback. Because I think the way that our messages and our programs from a corporate perspective are probably pushed out into the world, it feels tight and well-reasoned and thorough from where we sit. But by the time it hits, its second, third order effects of different communities downstream, it changes. And I think those are the communities that we needed to work with to bring into the fold, to your point, Henk.
Yeah, I love that. We're running out of time, so we're definitely not going to get to the other 22 questions. So I'm going to ask everyone that's asked questions, please message us, or you can message me. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, you name it. Well, I work for a social company, so I better be on social. So you'll find me out there. But I'm going to ask everyone one more last question. If you can give anyone listening in today one tip from what you've learned through the many years that you've done this, what would be that one thing that you want to leave them with? I'll start with Erin. Throw you in the deep end.
I said, oh gosh, I'm still thinking.
She's the one that rehearses everything 3 times before the big day. So,
I think that especially in a time like this, or if you're starting an initiative, or if you're working on a really hard issue, there's something to be said for like one foot in front of the other. And sometimes it can be really overwhelming when we all think about the work that we do and the world that we know can exist and should exist and that we're trying to build toward. It can be really hard to not kind of get spun out and stretch yourself out too far. And social impact and social justice and all of this only works if we build it strong, we build it right, and we build it together. And so I would just say, like, one foot in front of the other, marching toward what we know we want to build is the way to do it.
Love it. Bryan?
I would just say briefly, like in being organized, whether you're a nonprofit that's interfacing back over to the corporate side of the equation, or the corporate entity. I'll speak just from the context that I've lived in most, even though I try and be as beneficiary and user-centric as possible. I've just found that, especially in my new role and in the roles before it, the quicker you can start to not stay like 10 steps ahead of everyone with social impact speak, but actually just kind of give it the names of what it really is. Like, it's financial investments, it's employee energy and investments, it's brand influence, it's technology enablement. Like, call it what it is, and then you can have fancy names for it. But the quicker that you can bucket the ways that you're going to partner or the ways that you're going to build sustainable programs, the quicker it gets a structure and people can respond to it, especially for people that don't live and breathe and read the same books that we all read all the time in the social impact space. So I think you can't underestimate the power of naming things. And for me, that then leads to creating buckets or pillars of focus so that people have some surface area to come in with and make decisions with you to move these things forward or move partnerships forward, things like that. So I would typically want you to isolate those into buckets of assets, frankly, that can be bi-directional with the social sector and the corporate sector, so that synergy can happen. Over to my peers. Thanks a lot, Henk. Great panel,
Thanks.
by the way.
Thanks, love it, Bryan. Ali?
I would say find your champions. I think it was really important early on to figure out who were the ones who totally believed in what we were doing and can get on that train with me and be like this, and just be those shouting from the rooftops, and ideally some rather senior, well-respected individuals. And then you're going to meet the ones who are like, I don't get this, and they were the naysayers. Like, and I learned, it took a little while sometimes, like, don't waste my time on that. I'll get back to them, other ones, and get some early quick wins and get those success stories, and then they get them showing, and then go back to the others later and show them these wins. Some people just need to be convinced in other ways, but finding the early champions and the ones who really had a voice that was respected within the company made a huge difference to moving much more quickly.
Love it. Vikrum?
I'm just echoing all of that. I would just say, call each other and listen. I know everyone here has incredible bios and have built incredible operations across a lot of organizations, but there is no perfect playbook. We don't always know exactly what to do. And so I think just picking up the phone, calling one of your peers, being like, hey, I'm thinking about this, it's going to be hugely helpful. And then when you say listen, it's okay if you're not the first action out there or the first commitment out there when there's a deluge of corporate activations and commitments. I know that feels like the game, but feel free to use your organization to be methodical and authentic to what it is, what space you occupy and what market you occupy. Because then I think that the brand voice in terms of pushing that good feels a lot more organic and core to who you are.
Love it. Thank you so much. I'll leave you, everyone, with this, that all of it, Bryan had a moment earlier. There will be tough times. There will be so many tough times ahead, and there will be so many incredibly good times ahead. But just remember this, you all make a difference. Each and every day, you don't always know it, you don't always feel it, you get frustrated, you know that you can't change the world fast enough. There are children dying from preventable diseases, there are people losing their businesses, there are people suffering all over this world. But don't ever forget that because you're here, the world is a little bit better. And no matter what happens, it's not going to get easier or any more difficult, but as long as that drives you, Ubuntu, I am because we are, what Vikram was saying there. So reach out to us. Thank you. Loved meeting all of you and hanging out with all of you. Stay safe, look after yourself, and wash your hands.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
That's right.
Thank
Take
you,
care, everybody.
Bye. Bye.